I'm going to talk about continuous vulnerability monitoring, which is basically to introduce to you some rationale for it, and then exactly what continuous vulnerability monitoring is, and some of the benefits that it might have for your organization. It's, in our opinion, it's something that most organizations don't do. I'd be surprised if anyone does it here, but it's becoming very popular in the United States, particularly within the US government and some of the larger commercial organizations as well. We've also seen it in some organizations in Australia, for example. So, first of all, everyone knows already about what I call the window of this opportunity. And the window of this opportunity is a very simple concept. Basically, the time from which a vulnerability is disclosed until the time when you get around to fixing it. Now, this is, by the way, we talk about Patch Tuesday. I like to call the Wednesday after Patch Tuesday Exploit Wednesday, because that's the time when all the bad guys are going to be trying to work out how to take advantage of those nice, juicy vulnerabilities that Microsoft has just disclosed. So remember, Patch Wednesday is a very important day in everybody's calendar. Basically, there's a chain. Again, this is something everybody knows, but I like to reinforce the point. The chain is, you need an exploit. An exploit will leverage a vulnerability, and a vulnerability will ultimately deploy something bad onto your computing systems. And the whole objective of what we're trying to do is to shorten the amount of time when you break the chain of vulnerability. So effectively, if you eliminate the vulnerabilities, you make it such that the exploit flat out won't work. Common sense. But it's a very simple concept, very good way to help enhance the security position of your respective organizations. Everybody's seen a slide like this a million times at every presentation they go to. This is just a typical example of a phishing attack, right? And an email gets sent from someone you trust, and it's got a nice, interesting PDF file or JPEG or something like that. The reason I'm highlighting this is this one occurred this year, so it's fairly recent. It would actually download the PDF file of interest, so you thought that you got what you really were supposed to get, but then it would also leverage a known exploit in Adobe Acrobat. And the point I'm trying to make with this slide is specifically this particular vulnerability was used in January of this year. It was already almost 2 years old, right? That's pretty bad, yet this worked many, many, many times. And it highlights the point, which we made a couple slides, that I don't think anybody really knows every application that's on their various computing devices and what level of revision that particular application might be at. Which means that unless you're very proactive in looking for vulnerabilities, you're probably not going to be able to identify holes like this that poke right into your organization. So again, this is something already almost 2 years old when it was deployed. On average, according to some research that we did, NIST says that there are about 77 new CVEs released on a weekly basis for the wide set of applications that people have on their various devices. On any given week, our team of engineers will release anywhere between 100 and 500 new Nessus plugins to be able to catch all these freshly released vulnerabilities. So again, it's a very, the point of all this is that the tempo of vulnerabilities emerging is very high. And it hasn't changed, as you can see from my chart, it hasn't changed significantly over the past 10 years. So again, this is not really news for most people, but it's something that I'd like to remind people of because I think it's very fundamental to understand this in order to keep your respective organizations secure. Some interesting statistics I was able to get from a company called Securina. In 2012, there were over 9,700 discrete vulnerabilities for more than 2,500 products. Over 421 different vendors had exposed various vulnerabilities over the course of the year. The primary vector for attack is, as it should be no surprise to anybody in this room at all, the primary vector for attack is the internet itself, right? 80% of the attacks came over using some type of traffic sourced from the internet in the first place. The average number of programs installed on any individual machine, a combination of Microsoft and non-Microsoft in the Windows world, is greater than 70. And I bet if you go back and you look, you'll probably find out this is actually fairly accurate with the applications that were installed on the machine to begin with, plus the applications that you've installed over the life cycle of the machine. So more than 70 is quite a bit, and that's a lot to be able to manage. 70 times 5,000 computers in your network. How many infinite permutations are there that you're unaware of? Quite a bit. Microsoft, the ratio of vulnerabilities from Microsoft to third parties. Lately, Microsoft has actually been doing a pretty good job, okay? 35% of vulnerabilities reported in 2012 were from Microsoft, and 65% were actually from third-party applications. The next slide, I think, will drive that point home. And the trend over time is that the vulnerabilities from third-party applications are actually going up, while the vulnerabilities from Microsoft are actually going down. I think the trusted computing initiative that Microsoft started a number of years ago is actually having a very positive effect. So I'm not bashing those guys today. Okay, one more thing is that the time to the patch being available for a disclosed vulnerability is actually decreasing. That means that at this point in time, 80% of the vulnerabilities have a patch already available at the time at which those vulnerabilities are disclosed. That's actually pretty good, but it's meaningless unless you're looking for the vulnerabilities in your infrastructure in a proactive way. If you do a vulnerability assessment in your infrastructure once every 6 months, once every 12 months, once a month or something like that, the vulnerability is going to be happily living in your network for that long period of time. So despite the fact that the vendors are actually doing a pretty good job now, are you doing a good job? Is the question that I'd like everyone to ponder for a few seconds. These are the bad guys, okay? The number one, this is where we get to bash the vendors. I apologize if Oracle's in the room, but the number one source of vulnerabilities in 2012 was Oracle because of Java, right? Number two, much to my surprise and profound disappointment, was actually Apple. But an Apple vulnerability isn't quite as bad as a Microsoft vulnerability because of the fact that, I gotta talk real fast now, because of the fact that they're not as widely deployed. Mozilla was next, Microsoft was next, IBM was next, and Google was last. But the big bad boy today is Oracle, seconded by Apple in terms of number of vulnerabilities. Trying to keep all this going and trying to keep all this moving along is a very hard thing. It's a Sisyphean task. You roll the rock up the hill, the rock rolls right back down on top of you. So effectively, the second you finish your annual vulnerability assessment, you've already got vulnerability in your boxes. It doesn't take any time at all. So the question is, how often is often enough? And there are two organizations that are proposing that the tempo at which you perform vulnerability assessments be increased to something from being a static process to something being more or less a continuous process. One of the organizations that is preaching this is SANS, and SANS Critical Control Number 4 has some guidance that tells you pretty much how often vulnerability should be scanned for and how often you should look. Effectively, these guys are saying at least once a week, and if you can do it as a continuous process, it's probably a lot better. The second guys are NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology in the United States. The United States government generally follows what NIST says. NIST is also has a document number 800-137, which is available for free download, that also preaches the benefits of doing a continuous vulnerability assessment. If you do vulnerability assessment as a continuous process, you're basically taking that window of this opportunity and you're compressing it, and concurrently you're improving the, or reducing the threat surface that your organization might be exposed to. Okay, so these are the 5 pillars of continuous vulnerability assessment. They are scan very frequently, common sense, focus on attack readiness, which means understand your ability to be resilient to an attack and understand the attack paths in network infrastructure. Fix things that are prioritized, the most important vulnerabilities, fix and eliminate daily if possible. So if you have a critical vulnerability on an internet-facing web server, you need to fix that straight away. You don't let it linger for very long. And you kind of analyze the attack paths throughout your infrastructure to figure out what's important to fix and what's not important to fix based on the exposure of that particular asset to the internet itself. Okay, the other two are basically, the last two are related to having the ability to measure and having the ability to monitor how well you're doing at eliminating vulnerabilities and mitigating vulnerabilities. And it basically will give you an indication as to how well your ICT processes are working. In order to do the last two, again, you need significant visibility into the actual effectiveness of your vulnerability management process. And that requires instrumentation and some software. To achieve continuous monitoring, you need to basically do, well, I made a mistake on it. It should be 5, not 1. Five things you need to do. One is deploy automation. If you're trying to do this manually, it's not going to work. It has to be an automated process. Number 2, visibility. You need visibility into the software and visibility into the overall thing to give you the metrics and give you the ability to manage things. Analysis tools, up-to-date vulnerability intelligence, and I think very significant is an understanding to inter-machine relationships. So I managed to pull it off in 15 minutes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dick. We would like